off with it. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture special Sunday show, which I realized is very linguistically appropriate for us to be doing this on Sunday of all days. I know it's not necessarily the easiest day for everybody, but seems right that the solar group should choose Sunday. It's been a busy week to kick off the evening, Daniel. Pleasure to see you. Busy way to kick off the year, wouldn't you say, Ed?
Yeah.
We got starting off strong. For anyone who has not been following the news, we took a dictator. I guess there's a meme. I think the memes have been extraordinary. I think my favorite one is Trump sitting in the Joe Rogan podcast setup, and he's saying that, the elites don't want you to know this, but the Latin American dictators are free. The El Presidentes you can just take them. I have one El Presidente. We went into Venezuela in this incredible 160th SOAR operation, and just we just bombed a few precise places, including the mausoleum of Hugo Chavez, and we kidnapped Maduro, essentially, and his wife, and brought him back. And the feelings on this are very mixed. The other, I hate to reference memes so much in a long form thing because they're a little bit lowbrow, and we're here for the highbrow stuff, but they capture sentiment. And another one I really liked was this guy sitting there thinking, oh, the military industrial complex is evil and terrible, and there's this like devil skull kind of sitting on his shoulder. That's like, do you see how fast we just crushed them? Like, it's very impressive, and it's hard not to get wrapped up in like the awesomeness of it. But it's the mixed feelings, I think, are people being torn between wanting to feel just patriotic and like, look how badass we are, look how awesome we are, because it was awesome. It was an incredible operation. But there's a sort of unease, I think, about it as well. One commentator, I think it was one of the who are they? Weinstein brothers. I don't remember which one. Said, I've always wondered if international law was real. And it feels like it's not right now. It feels like.
And another thing you saw on social media outside of the memes was people repeating the phrase that there's a lot of people, I'm paraphrasing, but a lot of people talking about the law to people holding swords.
Yeah. And it's like, that's true. Does might make right? Is that the world we live in? And it's funny that. So go ahead.
I mean, the if there's a truth, I mean, this is something that is actually complicated, and yes. I don't like hearing. I don't like the word kidnap. They took him.
Yeah. I mean, it's like murder versus assassination versus execution versus killing versus whatever. There's a lot of moral loading in the language we use for it. I didn't mean kidnap in a way to denigrate the legitimacy of the U.S. government. I meant it just descriptively. There was another meme floating around about I labeled it as the infinite green energy technique, where U.S. military kidnaps Maduro, brings him to the United States for drug charges. He's in the United States illegally. ICE kidnaps him, takes him back to Venezuela. Maduro's in Venezuela. Repeat ad nauseum. But jokes aside, the timing of this is extraordinary because we had been talking, as anyone who's followed us from last week has known, we had been planning on talking about Plato's Republic. Yes, Ed got his own Alan Bloom copy. Excellent. And I mean, the opening of this book, really the subject of this book, is about justice, and we're asked to imagine. We actually get the ring of invisibility that Sauron possesses in Lord of the Rings in book 2. A man who can do anything he wants with impunity. And because Socrates defends justice. The opening, let me start at the beginning here. The question that Plato is asking in the Republic, which is very, very deeply influential in solar idealism in general, but it matters to this question too. What do we make of a situation like this where if someone is above the law, is there any reason to be just, or do we just do what's most advantageous to us? And Taurmenos has gotten about, you said you were through book 1 now out of 10. And tell us what has your impression been so far?
Well, Socrates is he's still crazy. But I mean,
he's a bit tedious.
It's a good. I mean, I think it's kind of engaging more than tedious, personally. But
I agree.
I mean, that question, you know, like one of the main questions asked over and over is that, you know, basically, is the unjust person that's winning, you know, doing better, making more profit, or whatever it is, you know.
Yes.
Than the just man.
Yes. And this gets like, so for those of you who aren't aware, let me go through a quick summary of what's going on in the Republic. And I actually made a post on Substack for anybody who is interested in reading that. It was what was the post called? It was like Returning to the Cave. Returning to the Cave. Yes. I'll repost that as a comment on this when it goes live. It's from December 29th. And it includes a summary of the book for those of you who want to catch up quickly. But basically, Socrates is kidnapped very, very jokingly, very playfully by some friends of his and taken against his will, you know, to this house party, basically.
He's forced to stay at a party that he wants to leave.
Right. He's taken to this house party of his friends, and a minor comment here. Glaucon, the young man he's with, his brother is in the kidnapping party. Adeimantus is Glaucon's brother, so they all know each other. It's friendly. It's joking around, but it's still a theme. The theme of being taken against your will, of the use of force, is invoked very early on. This is a political book about the use of political power. And among other things, and when they get to this house, I'll skip the initial part, even though it's very relevant, where Socrates is talking to an old man, and by means of talking about old age and aging and so forth, they get into this question of what is justice. If being just is good, what is justice? Is it nothing more than speaking the truth and paying your debts? What happens if someone's insane? Are you honest with them? Do you give back their weapons if they, you know, are likely to do something crazy? And this leads to this back and forth where Socrates is tying everybody up in knots, and a sophist named Thrasymachus lunges forward like a lion. The descriptions are very visceral. And he says, Socrates, stop like doing all this in your typical ironic fashion. You know, you always ask, but you never answer, and this and that and the other. But eventually they get him to give his own idea of what justice is. And Thrasymachus gives, long before Friedrich Nietzsche or Ragnar Redbeard or any of these other people. Basically, the might is right answer. Justice is the interest of the stronger. And he says people who believe in morality are not evil, but they're just very simple people. They're naive. They don't understand how the world works really. And he gives this great metaphor when Socrates sort of counter interrogates him a little bit. He's like, "Oh, you think a shepherd is herding sheep for the sheep's benefit? Like you think the shepherd is here to what's the three F's? Floss, shear them basically for their wool or their meat or for other nefarious uses, depending on what country you're in, Scotland in particular. But Socrates points out there's a word trap here where Thrasymachus has agreed to argue on things in the strict sense. So Socrates gets to say, well, as soon as you're fleecing them, you're no longer a shepherd, you are a knitter, or whatever the shearer is. Or if you're killing them, you're no longer a shepherd, you're a butcher. And that's a different role. And we're talking about the shepherd because you agreed to this very strict sense of what a ruler is. And that allows him to declare victory. But what we get to in book 2 is nobody is satisfied by this. Everyone looks at this and they're like, okay, you've tied someone up in knots with words, but if you really want to persuade us and not just appear to persuade us, then let's go a little bit further. And the two young men, Adeimantus and Glaucon, give a description of a man who possesses a ring like Gyges was said to possess. And we get the ring of Gyges, a ring of invisibility that will allow someone to get away with anything they want. They can have sex with who they want. They can kill who they want. They can release from prison who they want. They have a ring of power that they can do whatever they like and they'll never get caught. And they go through all the long list of all the utilitarian explanations that elders give for why it is good to be just. Oh, other people will treat you better. There's rewards in heaven. It's generally better to be just. And they say, well, it sounds like a skill issue on the generally better part, where we all just get it. But if you're just really good at things, then just be really good at being unjust. If your concern is the gods, well, the gods can be bribed. Even the poets tell us this. You can just make the right sacrifices. Once you've stolen all the things, you have all the stuff to make the sacrifices and you'll be fine. And maybe there are no gods. And they one by one list off and tear down all the arguments. And they say, Socrates, you have argued that justice is not just a good as a means to an end, but is an intrinsic good. So tell us, compared to this man with the ring of Gyges, who can get away with anything he wants, or maybe the U.S. military in a Apache helicopter, consider a man who is perfectly just, who is just, but in wanting to be just and not merely appear it, everyone believes him to be a bad man. Everyone believes him to be unjust. And ultimately, there might be some political analogs to this too somewhere. We don't know. Ultimately, he is captured and tortured and killed, impaled, or some translations actually have him crucified, unjustly. Now, tell us, Socrates, if justice is an intrinsic good, why is it better to be the second man, as you say, than it is to be the first, the man with the ring of invisibility? And that's the challenge set to Socrates. And then the entire rest of the book is an attempt to answer that question. And they build this imaginary city, and they go on digressions. They explore this allegory of the cave that many people are perhaps familiar with. And it concludes with a strange allegory about a trip to the underworld. But it's an extraordinary book. It is probably the foundation of all of Western philosophy and political thought, as an answer to this question, why be good? And when we see people with incredible power, whether that's President Trump or President Putin or Xi Jinping, or any of these leaders who seem to be above the law. They aren't invisible per se, but they have a lot of helicopters and missiles and submarines and so forth. And they do seem to be able to do what they like. So why not just do whatever they like? And the answer that Plato provides is perhaps relevant to a military political power like ours, you know. And it's a lot of the, I mean, the complaints about the military industrial complex are complaints about an imbalance of the sort of spirit of the country. Like something is, like, we have this cancerous growth. And what we see in the Republic, well, I'll check to see if anyone has any questions or if anyone's familiar, or are you familiar at all with other parts of the book?
Here and
A little
there.
bit. The allegory of the cave.
Yeah, a lot from listening to you. A lot more with with forms, because of a forms rabbit hole.
Oh,
but
we'll have to get.
But that's
forms.
a whole.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole. That's a day of its own.
That threw me for a loop for many years. I'll be honest. Jack says, I don't think having sex with anybody who you want to just because you're invisible would go as well in practice as it sounds at first. Yeah, it probably wouldn't. And Socrates does kind of bring that up towards the end too. The feeling you get on the other side of doing what you want and being able to do what you want is not as fun as you think it's going to be. It's never as easy or as simple. And there's a mirroring of language from book 1 to books 9 and 10, or between book 2 really and book 9, where they're Adeimantus and Glaucon are explaining all the good things that will come to the unjust man, who they are steel manning. They're saying, here's the argument for injustice. Socrates, we want you to persuade of justice because we want to be just, but we're not persuaded of it yet. But they're listing out, like, the unjust man gets to do all these things. He has these benefits. He has all these great effects, whereas the just man has to suffer X, Y, Z. And that language is repeated verbatim, but inverted in book 9, where they're saying, so therefore we see that the unjust man suffers X, Y, Z, and the just man gets to do X and gets to do Y, and whatever, not quite whatever he likes, but and the reason ties into our archetypes, the Father, the Striker, and the Lord of the Earth, in how Plato lays out the soul of an individual, which is likened to kind of the composition and constitution of a city. And we have the most important class at first appears to be the warrior class. They're saying, wow, this is a really difficult question. How are we going to defend justice? Well, let's imagine a city, because if we can find justice in a city, because we don't even know what it is yet, then maybe we'll be able to find what it would be like in a person and say whether it's better or worse. So they build this city in their minds in the pursuit of justice. And they say, well, we'll have to have warriors, right? We'll have to have a really strong military to defend our city. And how are these warriors going to be trained? And, you know, the conversation about the warrior class, the guardians, as they're called, is a fair part of books 3 and 4. It's like most of the early discussion of the city and how they're going to be trained and raised and so forth. It's very Spartan in many ways. But there are some problems with the warrior class as a warrior class. How are we going to make a class of people that are fierce and defensive and dangerous, but who are friendly to their neighbors and to each other? Can it be done? And then they say, well, we see an example of this in noble puppies, so maybe it's possible in people too. We'll just have to train them right. But that risk is still there. It's been brought up, and like we see with the military industrial complex, there is a risk of our military perhaps being less friendly than it should be to us in some ways. By the way, I don't have a strong opinion on the raid. This was just a segue. I think a lot of people are jumping on social media with very little actual understanding of Venezuela or why we went in, with very strong opinions about this is why. And it's fun to opine, it's fun to explore, but I think the only honest answer is we're not sure, and we might not know for a while. It might have to do with China, it might have to do with Israel, it might have to do with Russia, it might have to do with just showing off our military. It could be something we don't even know about. There's any number of reasons there.
And it's not but people also, everybody talks on social media like it's some unprecedented thing that has never happened before. This is something that happens all the time. And many times things like this have happened and it's all been kept a secret for the most part.
Yeah.
There's a lot more things happening now where it's not a secret. There's almost too much information.
And there is something cool about the fact that Maduro wasn't killed, like Shinzo Abe was, shot with a homemade gun. President Trump was, of course, shot, not lethally, thankfully, but, many presidents are executed. And the fact that Maduro was captured without being injured is it's kind of neat. It's kind of an upgrade from the lower caliber stuff. But anyways, that we're getting sidetracked from the important stuff. The guardians, it turns out, are not going to be the true rulers of the city. The warriors aren't going to be the rulers of this city. They're its protectors, and its rulers will be chosen from among the guardians. But Plato advances this idea of a philosopher king, right? There are laborers who are just doing their jobs normally. There are the warriors that defend the city and everything within it. And there are the philosopher kings that order how the city is going to be, where it's at war or not, what the laws are going to be, and so forth. And the philosopher kings live a very Spartan lifestyle themselves. They don't own anything. They're not paid very much. They're doing this all for the interests of the city, and that's very important to emphasize, because it comes out in Plato's Cave, and Ian says, "I recall you once called the cosmological worldview like that of Plato's Cave, but contained the inner world, the real world, and the glass cube that distorts our perception of the real world." Yes, that's getting into form territory. We'll come back to that, because the cave is, people who don't know anything about Plato and anything else about Plato usually know the philosopher king and the forms, which is the cave. Basically, the philosopher king, the cave, and the forms. If you've seen the movie The Matrix, you have a general idea of the allegory of the cave. But what Socrates says is these three classes in our city are analogous, perhaps, to the character of a person and to parts of a person. And at the very end, in book 9 or 10, he actually creates an image. He says, imagine a man, but peel back his skin. Inside the man are three other entities. There is a multi-headed monster, like a hydra. Those are the desires. Those are the appetites. This is what makes you want to eat, to have sex, to pursue pleasure, to escape danger. Just the basic animal desires is like a multi-headed monster. And then next to the multi-headed monster is a lion. That is your thumos. That's your spirit. It's the thing that makes you want status and glory. And it makes you righteously angry when injustice is committed, right? That's the like your warrior component. And then there's a man, like a human being, which is the logos. It's the reasoning, calculating part of the mind, that prefrontal cortex, right? And he says none of these parts are bad. The multi-headed monster is not bad. It can be cultivated to be better, stronger, and more virtuous in its own ways. But if it is not constrained, if it is running the ship, bad things can happen. The lion, that spirited part of the man, is also good. It's good to have that, but it too also has to be constrained. And the man must not so much rein these animals in, because he can't. The man will get overpowered by the lion or the multi-headed monster, but he has to tame it. He has to befriend these monsters, to give them enough food to become their friends and to satiate them, but also to not let them run amok, to train them. And it's the purpose of the rational part to treat the other parts of the body in this way. And that's the conclusion that they sort of arrive at for the individual from the metaphor of the city. And as part of a digression, we see this allegory of the cave that everyone knows about. And he basically says, imagine a cave. Behold a cave, or behold human beings chained in a cave. They're chained in such a way that they can only face in one direction. Behind them is a wall, and there's flames behind the wall that project the light of the flames onto the back wall of the cave, and that's all they can see. And along this wall, the caretakers of the cave hold up puppets. And so the people in the cave see shadows of the puppets from the fire on the cave wall, and they come to believe this is real. They hear echoes. They don't know where the sound is coming from. They associate the sounds of the puppeteers with the puppets themselves and say, this is reality. But suppose, Socrates asks, that one of these prisoners was freed. Suppose he was freed and forcibly dragged up out of the cave. And on his way out, he sees the wall and he sees the fire. And he's like, oh. And then as he's coming to the mouth of the cave, he looks up and sees the night sky through the mouth of the cave. And he's like, oh. And then being dragged up into the world above, he sees real objects. And he comes to realize, oh, these puppets were just imitations of these real objects. And then the sun appears. And once his eyes acclimate to the sun, the light of the sun, he can see sort of the sun itself. And that's the idea of the good, is what the sun is analogized to. It is the thing by which we are able to see and categorize things. And many people, including Neoplatonists, will interpret this metaphor, this allegory, as an illustration of degrees of reality. Like the puppets are less real than the things they represent. And the shadows of the puppets are imitations of the imitations. They're even less real versions of the less real things. And this is what threw me for a loop for a long time. What I learned very recently, actually, was that the Greek word idea, which is where we get the word idea, and eidos are visual terms. They refer to a visual image of a thing, not like a concept in the linguistic sense of a thing. And so it's not just that the puppet is more real in the sense of existing more. We can actually see it more clearly. And the allegory of the cave is illustrating not degrees of reality per se, but degrees of strength of knowledge. Like someone's knowledge of things is weakest if they're interpreting it from shadows, but their knowledge of reality is strongest if they're looking at physical things up above in the real world. the actual horse, the actual chair, rather than a puppet of a horse or a puppet of a chair or the shadow of a puppet of a horse or a chair. And their knowledge will be most profound of all if they understand how the sun affects their vision in the first place. And once you understand the language of visualness, and what's fascinating is Socrates, because my critique of Plato is always like, these forms, there's no difference between a form and an imitation in concept. Like, your forms have to be based in language anyways. But when Socrates gets to the idea of the good and says, I can't even describe this to you, you can't follow me here, you'll have to experience it yourself. We're in a place beyond language, essentially. It really highlights the visual component of this, and that we're talking about knowledge, not reality itself. I hope I'm not losing too many people in this. And this corresponds to which animals, which parts of ourselves do we have in charge? Because the rational part has the best view of the above world, has the best view of the idea of the good, of how things really are. The the spirited part, the lion, I think this is not clear from the Republic, but we can say, and I think this is actually clear from when you look at veterans on social media, they have a view of the puppets, and they get very caught up in who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, like who's doing this. And then the appetites are, of course, just chasing the shadows. There was a really, really good bit given by Owen Benjamin. I don't know if anyone who's listening to this follows this. Ian, who's commenting, probably is familiar. He's a comedian that kind of left Hollywood, and now he's just like homesteading off in rural Idaho somewhere. But he gave this analogy of people waking up in politics, becoming woke, but not in that sense. It's like they're watching a sports game, and suddenly they realize, oh, my team just traded our quarterback for their quarterback. I don't know if this has anything to do with our cities at all. Is this all just a show? And then they look up a level and they see, oh, this is all about Pepsi, because Pepsi wins no matter which team wins. This is all a big operation to get us to buy more Pepsi, just as an example. And this is like, good, you've moved up one level, but there's a level above that. And he says, his analogy was the people who are caught on Israel in particular are at the Pepsi level. It's like, okay, there's a lot of truth here, but there's a level above that too. And he says there's competition between Pepsi and Coke. And at the level of Pepsi and Coke competition, the corn syrup distributor wins no matter who wins. And who is the analog to the corn syrup distributor? It's basically, it's not even a real person. It's something like the logic of political power itself. It's like there's a spirit to this politics of power that acts and behaves through people in a consistent particular way. And that's like the highest level of understanding that's going on. And it feels like, this is Owen Benjamin's analogy again that I'm borrowing, but it feels like Plato is coming to a very similar kind of conclusion, that there are spirits within us, and he ascribes these to different political regimes in the real world. There's their perfect aristocratic regime where the philosopher king is in charge. That's the rational part. And they're basically like, but that doesn't exist in the real world. It never does. And there's actually a way in which, even if it was achieved, it would collapse into the next level. And you fall down from the highest level, the aristocratic or the well-run monarchic reign, to that's the first type of regime. The second type of regime he calls the timocratic or timarchic. That's the rule by the lion. And basically, like, we're going by honor. and it's you could do worse. It's pretty good in a lot of ways, but it's got some downsides too. You know, you're not going to calculate things as well. And it turns out honor, like a shadow on the wall, is not quality. Honor is not virtue. It's like an imperfect heuristic for virtue. We honor people because they have virtue, but sometimes people have honor because other people think they have virtue when they don't. You know, it's this sort of social aggregation. So when that fails, you go down from the aristocratic to the timocratic to the oligarchic. And he has these brilliant, weirdly precise and accurate psychoanalysis of the types of people that occupy these regimes. The oligarchic is, of course, the rule by money. And money is, of course, an imperfect heuristic for honor and value too, but it's one below honor. And then below the oligarchic, you have the democratic. And now with oligarchy, you're now out of the lion and you're into the many-headed monster. You're into just pure desire. The oligarchic is like interested in money. And we're still holding on to some virtues here. But whenever you can get away with it, there's vice. And he says the tell for the oligarchic man is he is way more frugal with his own money, and he's very, very liberal with other people's money. And then below the oligarchic, we have the democratic regime, which is all about freedom and liberty and equality. The democratic man loves freedom, and his psychoanalysis is so good. I felt kind of felt kind of pointed at in reading it. He's always jumping from one thing to another, never really staying with anything for any long period of time. But one day he wants to be a weightlifter, another day he wants to be a philosopher, another day he wants to try drugs and be a musician, and so on. And he's just jumping around to all these different things. And it's a very vibrant world, but it's got all kinds of problems. And these desires, this many-headed monster is allowed to grow. And it becomes a very dangerous thing. And then the tyrannical regime with the tyrants that live within it are basically addicts. The monster has the reins. The tyrannical man will do anything to get more of this desire, but he can never satiate himself. It's insatiable. And the things that he does in order to get more of that high, whether it's sex or power or literal drugs, and sex and power are actually equated early in book one. I don't know if you caught this, Ed, but when Socrates is talking with Cephalus, there's this moment where Cephalus is asked, can you still have sex? And he quotes Sophocles, I think, who says, "Peace, I'm glad to be free of that mad monster." And that's of course they're talking about sexual desire, but it's an allegory for power and the libido dominandi, the lust for power that many of these people with their bugged out cocaine Hillary Clinton eyes or Adam Schiff, they've got these psycho eyes, that lust for power is a son of a bitch. And it's really hard to rein in once you've tasted blood, so to speak. And I think he actually uses that language. And so in the way that the Democrat, the person is like the regime they occupy, and the regimes are like the soul of the man. And his epistemology, his way of thinking about what's real in the world are like these things too. We have a sort of holistic, total view of Plato's way of looking at the world, which is at the same time political and personal, therapeutic and philosophical, kind of all wrapped up in one. Ian says Sanpaku eyes. I don't know what that means. I'll have to look it up later. I should know from years of Japanese, but it's yeah, it's there's probably many names for that. Like I'm telling you a lie, and I'm gleeful that you're gonna believe it. You're like, please stop. But yeah, I've gone on for very long, but I feel like the application to situations like Venezuela or whatever else are, you know, we can begin by recognizing that we're not in the pilot's seat. We're not in the of the helicopter or the White House. There are things we don't know, and maybe we're not helping by loudly jumping up with our opinions about it. But there is a kind of superficial case that when we let our military desires run things, we're maybe seeing through a filter of the world of how our military would like it to be and what's fun for the military, but not necessarily what's good for the other desires or the totality of the country. Maybe, again, we don't know for sure, but there's a lot going on. But that's sort of my first impression. I am in awe of the strike. I'm like, it's pretty freaking cool, but I'm not sure we should have done it. Something feels weird about it.
And what can you really do anyway, regardless of what you think? And
yeah,
and then I'm still in the ending of book 1, trying to figure out what just even means.
Right.
I mean, we're all trying. That's there doesn't really seem to be a firm answer to that question.
I've just run through a very, very quick crash course basically on the plot and an interpretation. My interpretation I've provided is not the only one out there. Everyone, Neoplatonists, I'm sure will disagree with me. Ian saying, oftentimes it is easy to say that the shadow represents an indirect way to acquire knowledge versus seeing and touching the things you are observing. But this isn't smart when looking at the sun, for example. Yes. So my interpretation, and this is just my interpretation, but this is set within the context of Socrates saying it's important for the philosopher, once he has come out and seen the light, it's tempting for him to want to stay out in the world above, that to just stay out of the matrix. But Socrates says, no, that's not his job. That's not why he was freed. He was freed to come out of the cave in order to get a higher level of understanding so that he could go back down into the cave. The purpose is to return, to go back down, which is why the first line of the Republic is, I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon to, do all these things. The Piraeus is this busy trade port, this very cosmopolitan place. He's coming down from Athens to the busy, messy, cosmopolitan trading port, which is the cave, politically speaking. It's a very, it's below Athens, right? We could say in our little hierarchy of regimes. So he's going down to the mess of the real world and everything. And from coming down from the world of daylight and the real objects down back into the cave, once his eyes readjust and he can say, okay, I see these shadows, he is in a better position to explain what the shadows are.
He understands the relationship between the shadows and the sun.
Precisely.
The sun ultimately representing something other than the tangible sun itself.
Yes, and he can explain this to the people who are still trapped there. Or if he can't explain it to them, he can at least guide them in a way that is to their own benefit if they will refuse. Because a big part of this is he talks about this subject, and this is one of the things that gets people's kind of eyebrows up and like, I'm not sure if I trust the Socrates guy, talking about the noble lie. The noble lie as a concept comes up in book 3 or 4. And Socrates says it's important that we tell people things that are not true, but guide them to living better. For example, we'll tell all our warriors that they were born from the earth and that they're all brothers and sisters together, even though they're actually not. And this will result in better things. And when I first read this, I was like, I don't like this at all. And many people, I think, have that reaction. But if we put it in the context of our final image of the man, the lion, and the many-headed monster, imagine trying to make a logical argument to a many-headed monster, or to make it, at the risk of making it too personal, imagine trying to make a logical argument to a drug addict. You know, an addict is someone who essentially by definition has lost their rational powers. They can still kind of reason, but their reasoning power has no control over at all over their bodies. They're going to do what their desires cause them to do. Is it ethical to just speak the truth and repay your debts against that person? And when you recognize that, I have an inner, I hate the AA frame where it's like, once you're an addict, you're always an addict. I think that's BS and harmful. But there is a part of you that is not philosophical, that does not respond to reason. You know, your like hindbrain area and your amygdala and like all that stuff back here is not responding to dialectic and syllogisms. You know, you have to talk to it differently. You have to talk to it in its own native language, and you have to learn what that native language is so that you can guide yourself. And it's that argument can be very, I think, uncomfortable to a certain kind of idealist and a purist who wants to make everything and everybody into a philosopher. But against that kind of idealism and the death of that sort of that purity of the ideal, I think we have to contemplate the incredible cruelty of, you know, basically tossing people into the deep end and expecting them to sink or swim regardless of their capabilities or where they are. And it's cruel to yourself too, for the same reason and in the same way. So Ian says, but even the higher knowledge that makes us feel enlightened and not shackled to ignorance is itself only another room within the prison he is in. Then he goes back to the prior room to tell the prisoners, well, maybe.
You could answer that like the book. Just reply, it would seem so if you say it is.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the big criticisms of the Republic and of Plato's dialogues in general. And what I love about book 1 is Thrasymachus actually makes this criticism of the whole group. He's like, you're always just agreeing and going along with everything he says. It's like, and the book continues that way. But like, yes, it's possible. And what's important is the exploration of if these things are true. Are the ideas I think have arrived at another mental prison? One thing that I was really pushing my instructor on, and that I got some pushback on from him, is I thought that Plato was arguing that we should all be philosophers, that we should all be trying to escape the cave, and that we should be kind of pure intellectual beings escaping the messy reality of the world. And it was my professor who pointed out, no, look, he's telling us to go back into the cave, and it's actually a temptation for the philosopher, a temptation into sin of a sort for the philosopher to stay up in the world of pure ideas. It is important to go back into your body and to live in your body. And the body is not a prison in like some Gnostic sense. It is the proper dwelling place. But if you let the lion and the monster run free, then it will probably feel like a prison, with a bad cellmate instead of a well-run, or at least an interesting and fun city in your mind.
And at some point, everyone will be reduced temporarily in the conversation to being just a wage earner.
Right.
I was stuck on that for a minute, like what the hell? But also with this question statement, like makes us feel enlightened. Like, what does it mean to feel enlightened? If feelings are only one aspect of, what it is to be a human being, what does it mean to feel enlightened? And what does that really mean? Does it really matter?
This is like really Plato for the 21st century. And it's the feeling of enlightenment is a fascinating thing to contemplate, because think about all the people out there who listen to podcasts as like a hobby, but I heard this terrifying phrase somewhere. My wife and I heard it together. It's a film producer was criticizing someone's TV show, and they said that this TV show was not second screen enough. And the idea behind that phrase is people are still looking at their phones while they're watching a TV show. So if the TV show is too complicated, if it's too deep, if there's too much going on that requires attention, people will lose interest and turn it off. So it has to be a little bit superficial and more action oriented and in the moment drama without any like long buildup. And what a like terrifying thing to contemplate. But think about how many people listen to podcasts that way. They're listening to a podcast as they're doing something else, as their attention is divided. And I do this too, by the way, sometimes to my shame. But that information is going right in one ear and out the other. And they're not going to remember any of it. But as they're listening to it, they feel like they're learning something. There's a feeling of learning, even though there's no application or use on the other side. And that feeling of learning something, and there's maybe things to be said here about psychedelics, the feeling of enlightenment is a very profound feeling. But if it's untethered from an actual functional knowledge of how things ought to go, it can be very dangerous. Plato has this metaphor of a ship captain, and the ship captain is a very good pilot, but he's not very good with people. He's not really paying attention to his crew. He's too focused on the stars, and the crew is all about the money that they're going to get from pulling into port. And the crew doesn't know anything about navigating. They don't know the waterways. They don't know the stars or anything, but they manage to mutiny and take control of the vessel from the captain. And the captain is now their slave in the hull of the ship. And he's like, okay, good luck to getting where you're going without knowing things. But they feel like they know how to pilot a ship, but the proof is kind of in the pudding of like, can you actually get there? Ian says, here you go, wage earners. Thank you.
Yeah. That ties in with book one also.
Yes.
The idea of, the correct work for an object or a person in its position. What is the correct work? And then the mutiny on the ship, I guess that's unjust, but they're winning at that moment.
Right.
They're getting more benefit than the pilot of the ship.
There's a time horizon difference, right? And I think you can map it to like the desires are very in the moment. The spirit is a little bit extended out. He can hold a grudge. He can look a little bit forward, but he's still pretty tethered in the moment. Whereas the calculating part looks out much further and can potentially has the ability to look out almost indefinitely, almost outside of time itself, to sort of eternal truths or rules about how things go, regardless of differences of details in the moment. But so that time horizon is pretty big. But people who think, oh, I can govern a ship because I have things I want to do with the money I would earn from piloting a ship, that's not a very long time horizon. So let me check to see if I got any questions online here. I probably did not, since I put the link up kind of late. I don't think I did. Have to check, though. We're going second screen here for a second. It's a very Platonic phrase when you think about it in a scary way.
The second screen. I'm not at my house when there's a television program that is being watched and followed. Like phones have to go. Yeah, it's like a rule. Like
that's a good rule.
You have to put your phone away. You know, and it's like anything. It's like get up to get a drink of water, and it's like, what are you doing? You didn't ask me to pause that. I'm just getting a drink of water, but we have to stop it. We have to both know exactly what's going on.
It's an annoying rule, but it's not a bad rule, you know, because it's so much of it comes down to like so much of our experience of the world comes down to like, where do we direct our attention? You know, and
it's more than one kind of attention. When it's like a family situation, you know, it's not just paying attention to the program, it's being, you know, present in the activity.
Which brings us to a meta point and maybe a justification for this whole show. When there's so much exciting stuff going on in Venezuela, like, is Venezuela itself a second screen event? Like are we being distracted from something that not intentionally in some malicious way by the puppet masters that the spirited people are always focusing on, but like just in general, does politics itself draw our attention away from things that maybe deserve our attention more, that we would rationally allocate our attention better if we were to think it through in a top-down manner? I think very often it is. And that's why I do like to take opportunities like this where big things happen as segues back to like personally relevant classics, because it is very, very easy for our passions, for our thumos, to get caught up in these big events. And I remember like when Charlie Kirk was shot, I wanted to do that too, to bring people's attention. Like, hey, now is a great time to revisit Gorgias. You know, I know a lot's going on in the news, but maybe like, have you considered questions about the immortality of the soul? I'm not sure I'm sold on it, but it might be good to contemplate that, like, if virtue is immortal and if you think that Charlie Kirk was a good person, and there's arguments for and against on that, but if you think he was, can a sniper actually hurt him? You know, or is he more like Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he gets struck down and he only becomes more powerful? It's an open question, and there's actually arguments on both sides. And like maybe it was an effective hit at a political level. I don't know.
But I mean, it's his memory that's being worked with by people that are still alive. So
right. But what I do know, regardless of which argument is true, is that for the average person, it's actually far better for them to be focusing on their own thinking and on how they are going to live, rather than getting caught up in a like really ruminating, dwelling cycle in what's going on elsewhere out in the world,
which is a total distraction from I mean, what would be important to me anyway? It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I want to know stuff. And some stories, some things happening are maybe more important or more interesting than others. But I mean, in almost all political news, like, what can I do besides, like, all that I could do is either just get on with shit or get super wrapped up in it and have a whole bunch of feelings and then
Right.
say a whole bunch of shit publicly. Someone might think it sounds smart. Someone might think that I sound like an asshole, but it's like, what am I doing at that point?
Well, what are you doing until you realize I need to have power? Our side needs to have power. How do I get power? And then we're back to book one. It's like,
Because there's not really anything I can do, I mean, there's not. What are we going to do about this situation? Like, oh, am I going to, I live a couple miles from the capital. Am I going to go down there and, fucking cry? Like what?
Yeah. It is good to focus on that. Ian says, I remember Andrew Wilson says that what we believe is good can only be grounded in either God or basic human preferences. What would you say to Wilson when it comes to order of fire values? That's a really good question. It's a fun one. I don't know if we have time to address this because that's like a 20-minute question. But I would say when you look at how God is defined in the argumentation of people like Andrew Wilson or Jay Dyer, what you find is an actual coalescing, a merging of God and basic human preferences. They define God in terms of the sort of aggregation of, distillation of, and purification of human preferences. Like they'll say, God is not one good thing among many, but goodness itself. Well, what is good apart from human preference? Good is a description of a thing. It's not a quality that exists independently of the experience, but good exists as an experience in relation to one thing relative to other things that are less good. So the human preferences get linguistically aggregated into this concretized, reified concept. I'm getting technical again. Into a concept called good, and then they say this is God. So, well, okay, we've run into the C.B. Robertson early critique of Plato's forms, except Plato's position is better than that. But I think what many of the people in the Christian apologetics world, people like Andrew Wilson and Jay Dyer, what they're doing is like it's like a Neoplatonic move where they try to take a literal version of the argument from the forms, not as epistemology, but as metaphysics. And I think that's where they go astray.
And how could, and one could also answer that question in the absence of any knowledge of Christianity, if such a thing could even exist in the world at this point. But that that could be looked at with not considering anything Christian at all. And then how do you, our basic human preferences are maybe basic human preferences are the divinity,
right? But at the risk of turning a 1 hour stream into a 6 hour stream,
yes,
I'll just leave a sort of teaser here. The idea of the good is really difficult to grasp. Like Socrates literally says in the Republic, like, you can't follow me here. We're beyond language when we're talking about the idea of the good, the image of the good. And the philosopher who really picked that up and ran with it is Martin Heidegger. But you have to cut off like half of the language that's been used in Western philosophy in order to get back to the place where we can even have that discussion. So Heidegger argues. And just as this book begins with the question of like, well, what is justice? There is a big question to be had about what is the idea of the good that is even lengthier and more difficult and more complicated than the idea of justice. So that's maybe a conversation to have with Andrew Wilson at some point when we get there, but probably not tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Order of Fire and solar idealism were striving upwards towards this idea of the good, but it happens through experience. It happens by developing your appetites, acquiring taste, having some thumotic experiences, get in a fight, pick up, get involved in some competitions and care about who wins and loses, and developing the skills of the Father as well. That by developing these experiences in a more Aristotelian way, you rise up towards the cave, not to escape the cave like we were talking about, but to live there, better in our little cave of humanity. And we think the archetypal deities of the Father, the Striker, and the Lord of the Earth are sort of idealized, refined, and perfected forms of these parts of the human soul. And so the good is maybe not even something that we can describe, but it's something we can get closer to by becoming more virtuous ourselves. And that's really the goal, I think.
Certainly.
Yeah. Well, sweet. Hopefully that was useful to some people. There'll be the quick shareable post on Plato for people who want the short dive. Anyone who wants the longer dive walkthrough, do check out Agentor's and my Jack's and my 8-part series on that. It's from about a year ago. Still, I think one of the best things I've done online ever. And of course, pick up a copy of yourself. And I can't recommend Michael Millerman's work and his courses highly enough. They are pricier than Jack and Mai's walkthrough, but it is worth it for people who take an interest in this sort of thing. So, and that seems like as good of a place to wrap it up as any. Ed, any final words?
No, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Stay tuned for next week where we'll talk about slightly lower brow stuff, I think. More normal current event stuff. And stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.